Today, a captured agent accused of spying for Russia is held in a locked room, forced to listen as her captor insists that people must lose everything before they will accept a leader. A rescue team will pull her out and rush her onto a private jet. But getting her home is only where the danger begins. In a secure war room, officials will realize their target is shielded by diplomatic cover, and the wrong move could hand her to Russia or even Iran. So they will make a choice they cannot undo, a covert operation the president is never told about. Helicopters will hit a rooftop. A warehouse will be breached. A single tail number will send fighter jets into the sky before anyone knows where the plane is headed. Undercover operators will slip into a world of glittering restaurants and quiet deals, hunting Russian assets who can be turned. And the stakes only climb. One capture could expose every case officer and every safe house the agency has. Meanwhile, a mother who swore an oath to save lives will refuse to pick up a gun, even as the danger creeps toward her family fake home. By the time a quiet porch conversation lays out 3 ways this could end, none of them safe, no one will be sure which one is coming. To understand how it all spirals this far, we go back to the beginning. The episode opens inside Jo's captivity, but her mind is being pulled in several directions at once. Fragmented images bring back the accusation that she might be working for Russia, her family begging her to leave the fight behind, and her own furious confrontation with the people who brought danger to her front door. Then the full reality comes into focus. Jo is restrained beneath a projection of destruction while a Russian captor tries to break her psychologically. He argues that people only surrender their freedom after they've lost everything else. In his view, chaos creates the need for an absolute leader, and Americans are already closer to accepting that bargain than they realize. Jo refuses to give him the satisfaction of fear. Instead, she attacks the weakness of Russia itself, mocking Putin, the military's failures, and a political system that has collapsed under monarchy, democracy, and dictatorship. Even tied down, she turns the interrogation back on the man holding her. The captor eventually admits that persuasion isn't really his job. Once Jo reaches Russia, he says, someone else will show her what that job looks like. Soon afterward, Russian-speaking operatives enter the room, cover Jo's head, carry her out, and load her onto a private jet. The aircraft takes off before the CIA can reach her, and the clock starts working against everyone trying to bring her home. At headquarters, the first update is devastating. A quick reaction force recovered Jo's beacon, but not Jo. Analysts begin cross-referencing vehicles connected to the Russian embassy with police license reader data. The assumption is that an SVR case officer is supervising the move, which means diplomatic plates and immunity could shield the people transporting her. The Russians' likely objective is clear: move Jo out of the United States, return her to Russian control, and use her as leverage in a trade for Yurimov. But the CIA knows any intelligence Yurimov carried is already being changed or neutralized. The more immediate danger is what Jo knows. The SVR has pieces of the Lioness program, but Jo can confirm operations, targets, travel routes, and partnerships that have never been publicly proven. If those details leak, the diplomatic damage could spread across the Middle East and reach partners including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Egypt. Congress, the United Nations, and the administration would all be pulled into the fallout. And that still isn't the worst possibility. Russia could hand Jo to Iran. Tehran could put her on trial, label her a war criminal, or transfer her to a proxy such as Hezbollah. At that point, Jo would no longer be only a captured officer. She would become political leverage capable of destabilizing alliances and forcing impossible concessions. The estimate is that the Russians need roughly 24 to 36 hours to get her onto an indirect flight toward Russia. The CIA covers airports and ports from Washington down the East Coast, but every minute without a location gives the captors another exit route. One official wants to inform the president immediately. Another argues that telling the White House could mean telling Senate intelligence, hundreds of staffers, and eventually the entire world. For the moment, they choose secrecy and authorize the hunt. NSA finally catches a vehicle moving toward an airport hangar. The team can't land openly without being seen, so they use a helicopter to reach the roof. Operators pour into the building, breach the warehouse, and overpower the suspects, but Jo is already gone. If you're enjoying this breakdown, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to the operation. Inside the hangar, the situation gets uglier. During the assault, Kyle executes a restrained Russian intelligence officer. The team forces another man to reveal the aircraft's tail number, N565KJ. Tracking has been blocked, but air traffic records confirm the jet departed only minutes earlier. Once again, the CIA has arrived just behind the target. The operators race back to the helicopter, while analysts identify the plane as a Challenger 300 with enough range to reach Cuba, Mexico, or Venezuela. Fighter jets are scrambled, and naval assets begin searching the Caribbean. But the jet has no submitted flight plan, its locator is disabled, and it is flying too low to track reliably. The military now needs rules of engagement for an aircraft it cannot even find. Back in the control room, Kyle's execution creates another crisis. Some members of the team see a clear violation of the rules. Kyle argues that ordinary rules cannot apply when Joe's capture could expose every case officer, safe house, operation, asset, forward base, and travel route connected to American intelligence. His logic is brutal. If Joe reaches a secure Russian facility, or worse, Iran, the consequences could be larger than the death inside the hangar. Kaitlyn refuses to excuse what happened. She orders Kyle and the others to stand down, warns him that he will be on his own if evidence surfaces, and tells the team to focus on finding Joe. At the same time, she recognizes that conventional boundaries may not be enough. Joe's captors are moving through networks built over years, and the people who know those routes carry them in memory, not on paper. Deputy Director Westfield takes the problem higher. The CIA missed Joe's plane by about 10 minutes, and the Russians still haven't publicly acknowledged having her. That silence is troubling. Joe spent most of her career in the Middle East, so she may not hold the kind of Russian intelligence Moscow normally wants. Her greater value is symbolic and strategic. She gives Russia and its proxies a way to humiliate the United States. Westfield proposes using Yurimov as leverage. The government could acknowledge his capture, offer him back, and frame the original operation as an attempt to prevent another Russian offensive. A ceasefire could provide political cover, even if a ceasefire isn't the real objective. The actual threat would come afterward. If Russia transfers Joe to a proxy, America's presence and purpose in the region could expand dramatically. That proposal forces the secret into the open. The President, Senate intelligence, and the Joint Chiefs will have to learn about a capture mission in Russia that many of them never knew existed. Westfield reaches the White House and tells the President they have a situation. From there, the episode steps back to show how Joe reached this point. At the family's temporary safe house, Neil has kept the girls home from school. Their security detail treats ordinary road construction like an ambush, and Neil decides homeschooling is safer than another dangerous drive. The humor at breakfast can't hide the fear underneath it. Everyone knows their fake home exists because the threat has already become personal. Joe asks Neil to learn how to use a pistol. She admits it may be an overreaction, but she wants him prepared for a fight that might never come. Neil refuses because he is a doctor and has sworn to do no harm. Joe argues that refusing to protect himself and their daughters could cause even greater harm. To her, violence is already at the door. To Neil, Joe's world is swallowing the family whole. The argument ends without a real resolution. Neil agrees to consider the training, but he remains terrified, not only for Joe, but for their daughters and the kind of world they now inhabit. Joe answers that the world didn't suddenly become violent. Political assassinations and power struggles have always existed. The difference is that this time, history has entered their living room. Joe then leaves with her team and heads into the operation that will eventually place her in Russian hands. In the SUV, the group discusses whether they can trust their Ukrainian source. Joe's answer is simple: they don't trust anyone. At the CIA briefing, the mission receives the name Operation Treasure. The Ukrainian source is Badger. Joe's team is Hornet. The special mission attachment is Spider. SVR officers are Gold, and recruited Russian assets are Silver. The objective is to identify people already working for Russian intelligence, get close to them, and offer a way out in exchange for the identity of their handlers. The challenge is that most SVR officers operate under diplomatic cover. They can be detained or deported, but they are difficult to prosecute. The team's offers must also remain vague because every potential asset has different legal and political value. A compromised politician is not treated the same way as an engineer selling classified defense information. While Joe's operators prepare their covers, the tension briefly gives way to the team's usual humor. The men shave, criticize one another's disguises, and joke about who looks least convincing in a suit. The others dress for a high-end night out. Joe shuts the comedy down because the mission depends on every person blending into a world where one wrong look can expose the entire operation. At the restaurant, the team spreads out and begins watching likely targets. Joe's people work the room while Byron sits down with Maxim, a Russian official who immediately recognizes that the Americans are fishing for something. Byron confronts him over Russian operatives showing up at a CIA officer's home. Maxim denies involvement and challenges Byron to prove otherwise. Byron then reveals just enough to create pressure. An SVR intelligence officer contacted a senior CIA case officer and offered legitimate information about Russian sources, capabilities, and assets. Maxim insists the story makes no sense. Russian officers no longer need to defect in the old Cold War sense. They can quit, apply for visas, and build new lives. He realizes Byron wouldn't openly discuss a real defection, so he pushes for the actual purpose of the meeting. The conversation shifts to Ukraine. Maxim describes it as historically Russian territory and accuses the United States of fighting a war that does not belong to it. Byron refuses to debate the policy and says he carries out the missions he is given. Then Maxim finally exposes the real pressure point. Russia has lost something extremely valuable to its president. He cannot formally ask for help and he cannot name the missing person, but he believes the Americans already understand. Byron offers assistance, on the condition that Russia accepts a favor in return. Without either man saying Joe's name, the possibility of a trade begins to take shape. Around them, Operation Treasure continues. An operative posing as a lobbyist approaches a defense industry salesman named Charles. Other team members move from the restaurant to a crowded nightclub, using flirtation, alcohol, and carefully constructed identities to get close to possible assets. The work looks casual from the outside, but every conversation is part of a much larger search. As Bobby explains, they may have to pass thousands of ordinary people before finding the one person who matters. The episode then returns to the present, where Kaitlyn arrives at Neil's temporary home. His daughter answers the door but quickly withdraws. Neil knows immediately that Kaitlyn hasn't come with good news. On the porch, Kaitlyn tells him they are close but still one step behind, and time is not on Joe's side. She gives Neil 3 possible outcomes. First, the CIA beats the clock and Joe returns within days. Second, the Russians win the immediate race and negotiations drag on for months or longer. A trade involving an officer accused of espionage would require sensitive disclosures and could endanger other officers, military forces, and strategic partners. Neil asks about the third possibility. Kaitlyn cannot bring herself to describe it directly. She only tells him to prepare for it, because Joe would want him ready to support their daughters if the worst happens. Neil asks Kaitlyn what her instincts say. She admits there are too many variables for instinct to mean anything. When he demands a clearer answer, she finally says the only honest thing she can. She doesn't know. Kaitlyn leaves, and Neil remains alone on the porch. The episode's countdown never reaches a rescue or a confirmed fate. Instead, it ends with the clock still running. Joe is somewhere beyond their reach. The CIA is trying to turn Yurimov into leverage. Operation Treasure has opened a channel to the Russians, and her family has been warned that every possible outcome carries a price. The central question is no longer whether the danger followed Joe home. It is whether the people chasing her can beat the clock before Russia decides what Joe is worth.